I've always prided myself on knowing how things work. 35 years as a mechanic teaches you that most problems have simple causes: a knocking engine, a slipping transmission, a faulty brake line. You learn to trust your instincts when something doesn't sound right. You'd think after 30 years of marriage, I'd be just as good at spotting problems with Linda. We met when we were both young, me 28, her 22. I was already working as a lead mechanic at Hartman's Auto, covered in grease most days, but making decent money. She was finishing her associate's degree in business administration, working part-time at the diner near the shop. I'd come in for coffee after my shift, and she'd always remember how I took it: black with 1 sugar. Simple times, good times. 3 decades later, we'd built what I thought was a solid life. The shop I eventually opened with my buddy Frank did well enough for us to buy a nice ranch house in a decent neighborhood. Our kids, Jenny and Mark, both moved out of state after college, but they call regularly. Linda and I settled into one of those comfortable routines that long married couples develop. Saturday morning breakfasts at Carla's Diner, Sunday drives in my restored '67 Mustang, holidays with the growing extended family. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I thought we were happy. The thing about being a mechanic is you develop an ear for when something's off. A pinging noise that shouldn't be there. A hesitation in the engine that wasn't there last week. Little warning signs that most people would miss. Linda started going to a different auto shop 6 months ago. I didn't think much of it at first. She said Carson's was running a promotion for oil changes. Made sense. Everyone likes saving a buck. But then she kept going back, every couple of weeks, like clockwork. She'd mention a strange noise or a funny smell or how the steering felt loose. Always something vague that needed checking. Always at Carson's. I offered to look at it myself. Hell, I own a garage. But she'd wave me off, saying she didn't want to bother me after work hours. That was new. In 30 years, I'd always handled our vehicles. Little things started piling up. She changed her hair, started dressing differently on errand days. Her phone would ding with texts, and she'd smile at the screen before quickly putting it away. Then last week I found the receipt in her car. Oil change, tire rotation, basic maintenance, dated 2 weeks ago. But I had changed her oil myself a month prior, and according to her odometer, she'd driven less than 2,000 miles since then. That's when I felt it. That same instinct that tells me when an engine isn't running right. Some gears weren't meshing the way they should in our marriage. Something was misaligned, misfiring. I decided to pay Carson's Auto Service a visit myself. That's when everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel. Carson's Auto Service sits on the corner of Maple and 3rd, a modest brick building with 3 service bays and a small waiting area. I drove past it twice before pulling into the lot across the street, where I could watch without being noticed. It was just after 4 in the afternoon when I spotted Linda's silver Accord pulling in. She parked near the side entrance, not where customers usually park. I gripped my steering wheel tighter as I watched her check her makeup in the rearview mirror before getting out. "What are you doing, Linda?" I muttered to myself. She was wearing that blue blouse I'd given her for her birthday and slim-fitting jeans, a far cry from the sweatpants she usually wore for errands. My stomach tightened as she disappeared inside. I sat there for 20 minutes, debating whether to go in or drive away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. That's when I recognized him through the big bay window, Jake Carson. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he was a rookie mechanic working under me at Hartman's. Back then, he was a skinny kid with quick hands and a quicker mouth, always talking about opening his own place someday. Looks like he'd made good on that promise. He was leaning against the counter, laughing at something Linda said. Nothing unusual about that, except for the way his hand lingered on her arm, the way she didn't step back, the familiar way they moved around each other like they'd done it 100 times before. I felt like someone had poured ice water into my veins. My breath caught in my throat as I watched Linda follow Jake into one of the service bays, not the front one, where they usually worked on cars. the back one partially hidden from street view, the bay door closed behind them. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." Common sense tried to fight through the fog in my brain. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe Jake was just showing her something on her car. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation that didn't involve my wife of 30 years sneaking around behind my back. But deep down, I knew. The same way I know when a timing belt is about to snap or a head gasket is blown. Some things you just feel in your gut. I sat there for another half hour, the radio playing songs I couldn't hear over the pounding in my ears. When Linda finally emerged from the bay, her hair was mussed, and she was buttoning the top button of her blouse. Jake followed close behind, his hand on the small of her back. They kissed. Not a quick peck between friends, but the kind of kiss that tells a story. My story. Our story. Except I was no longer a character in it, just a witness watching from across the street. I don't remember driving home. One minute I was sitting in my truck across from Carson's, knuckles white against the steering wheel, and the next I was pulling into our driveway. The house looked the same. White shutters, Linda's flower pots on the porch, my grill on the deck. Everything exactly where it should be, while my entire world had shifted off its axis. I sat in the garage for a long time, staring at the empty space where Linda's car should be. The concrete floor had oil stains from years of me working on our vehicles, old habits, old trust. Inside I moved like a sleepwalker, opening a beer and dropping into my recliner. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the empty house. Each second felt like it was counting down to something inevitable. When my phone buzzed with a text from Linda, my hand shook as I read it. "Running late. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." "Love you?" I laughed, a harsh, unfamiliar sound that bounced off the walls. 3 decades together, and this is what it came to. A casual lie, followed by those 2 meaningless words. I opened our bank app and scrolled through recent transactions. There they were, Carson's Auto Service. Every 2 weeks for the past 6 months. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. The most recent charge was from 3 days ago, $179.50. What the hell was she paying for? Certainly not car repairs. I'd checked her car myself last weekend. Oil levels perfect, tires barely worn, everything running smoothly. My mind spun with questions, each one worse than the last. How long had it really been going on? Did everyone know? Was I the neighborhood joke? Old Tom, too busy with his shop to notice his wife screwing around with a younger man? I thought about calling Mark or Jenny, but what would I say? "Hey kids, guess what? Your mother's cheating on me with a guy I used to train." The words tasted bitter, even in my thoughts. By my 3rd beer, anger had replaced the initial shock. Jake Carson. Of all people, I'd taught that kid everything he knew about engines. Had he learned how to dismantle my marriage during those lessons too? I heard Linda's car pull into the driveway around 8. The garage door opened, then closed. Her key in the lock. The familiar sound of her purse hitting the counter. "Tom? You home?" she called out, her voice so normal it was surreal. I took a deep breath and made my decision. Not yet. Not tonight. I needed to be smart about this. "In here," I called back, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Linda appeared in the doorway, looking exactly like my wife of 30 years. Same smile, same way of brushing hair from her forehead. Except now I saw everything differently. The slightly smudged lipstick, the flush in her cheeks that wasn't there this morning. "You wouldn't believe the day I had," she said, slipping off her shoes. Traffic was terrible, coming back from the mall. The mall, another lie so easily told. "That's so?" I kept my tone casual. "Anything interesting happen?" "Not really, just picked up a few things." She gestured vaguely toward the shopping bags she'd placed by the stairs. Had she actually gone shopping after seeing Jake to build her alibi? The thought made me sick. "Your car running okay? No strange noises or anything?" I asked, watching her face carefully. A flicker, just the slightest hesitation, crossed her features before she answered. "It's fine. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering. Being a mechanic and all, you know how I worry about our vehicles." She laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Well, don't worry. Carson's takes good care of it." The name hung in the air between us. Carson's. I waited for her to show guilt, to confess, to give me something. Instead, she kissed my forehead and headed upstairs to shower. I sat there, listening to the water run, imagining her washing Jake's touch from her skin before climbing into our bed. Our bed. 30 years of memories, now tainted. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay beside her, studying the familiar curve of her back, the rhythm of her breathing. Had she always been capable of this level of deception, or was this something new? What had I missed? By morning, I had a plan. Not a good one, maybe, but a plan nonetheless. If Linda thought she could play this game, she would soon learn I could play it better. At breakfast, I watched her check her phone several times, smiling at whatever she saw there. When she looked up and caught me watching, she quickly set it face down on the table. "I have an appointment today," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "Might be home late." "Oh? What kind of appointment?" She tried to sound interested, but her eyes kept darting to her silent phone. "Just checking out a new supplier for the shop. Nothing exciting." As I grabbed my keys to leave, I leaned down and kissed her cheek, just like any other day. "Love you," I said, watching her eyes. "Love you too," she replied automatically, already reaching for her phone again. The words meant nothing now, but soon they wouldn't need to be said at all. I didn't go to the shop that day. Frank could handle things without me. Instead, I drove to Carson's Auto Service and parked across the street again, waiting until I saw Jake step outside to smoke. He looked different now than he had last night. Just a regular guy in oil-stained coveralls, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he checked his phone. This was the man my wife had chosen. This was who she risked everything for. I waited until he finished his smoke break and went back inside before I crossed the street. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed it open, announcing my presence to the teenager behind the counter. His name tag read Kyle. "Morning," I said with a practiced smile. "I need to speak with Jake Carson." "You got an appointment?" Kyle asked, barely looking up from his phone. "No, but he'll want to talk to me." I kept my voice level. "Tell him Tom Brennan is here." Kyle disappeared into the back, and I stood there among the tire displays and motor oil advertisements, breathing in the familiar smell of rubber and grease. 35 years in the business, and garages still felt more like home than anywhere else, except this one. This one felt like a crime scene. Jake emerged from the back office, wiping his hands on a rag. He froze when he saw me, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, fear, and finally settling on a forced casualness. "Tom," he said, extending his hand. "Long time no see. What brings you by?" I ignored his outstretched hand. "Let's talk in private, Jake." His eyes darted to Kyle, then back to me. "Sure thing. Office is back here." I followed him through the service area, clean, organized, profitable-looking. He'd done well for himself. We passed the back service bay, and I felt a surge of rage imagining what had happened there just yesterday. I shoved the thought away. Not now. Stay focused. Jake's office was small but neat. Certificates on the wall, pictures of classic cars, a photo of him with his arm around a blonde woman I didn't recognize. "So," he said, gesturing to a chair as he sat behind his desk, "what can I do for you? Looking to sell your shop? Ready to retire?" "Cut the bullshit, Jake." I remained standing. "I know about you and Linda." He blinked, then let out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about, Tom?" "I was here yesterday. I saw everything." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed. Look, Tom. How long? I interrupted. He stared at his hands. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. While I fixed cars and paid bills and planned our anniversary trip, my wife and this man, this kid I'd trained, had been laughing behind my back. She was going to tell you, Jake said weakly. When? After another 6 months? After I retired? When exactly was my wife planning to mention she's been fucking my former apprentice? Jake flinched at my words. It's not like that. We dash. Save it, I cut him off. I didn't come here for explanations. Then why did you come? I leaned forward, placing my palms flat on his desk. To make you a proposition. Jake's brow furrowed. What kind of proposition? I want to book a service appointment next Thursday, 6 p.m. We close at 5:30, he replied automatically. You'll stay open for me, and make sure Linda's here too. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You want to confront us together? No, I said, straightening up. I want to end this cleanly. No scenes, no drama, just the truth. Out in the open. One time, one place, then we all move on with our lives. Jake studied me for a long moment. Does she know you know? Not yet? And you're not going to tell her? He nodded slowly. Okay, Thursday at 6. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Tom? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I paused at the door. No, you're not. You're just sorry you got caught. Walking back to my truck, I felt strangely calm. The first part of my plan was in motion. 6 days. 6 days until I would face them both and reclaim what was left of my dignity. For the next week, I would live with Linda as if nothing had changed. I would eat her cooking, sleep beside her, kiss her goodbye in the mornings. I would be the perfect husband while I prepared to walk away forever. And she wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. The next 6 days were the strangest of my life. I moved through our house like an actor on a stage, hitting my marks and reciting my lines. How was your day, honey? What's for dinner? Sleep well. Each word felt foreign in my mouth, contaminated by the truth I now carried. Linda noticed nothing. Or if she did, she attributed it to work stress. She continued her routines, texting when I wasn't looking, making excuses to run errands, coming home with that freshly showered glow that had nothing to do with actual exercise. At night she reached for me once, her hand sliding across the sheets in a familiar gesture. I pretended to be asleep. The thought of her touching me now made my skin crawl. How could I have been so blind for so long? On Tuesday, I visited my lawyer, Martin Goldstein. We'd been friends since high school, and his face fell when I told him why I'd come. You sure about this, Tom? He asked, leaning back in his leather chair. 30 years is a long time to throw away without trying to fix things. There's nothing to fix, I replied. She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. Martin nodded and pulled out the necessary forms. I'll have everything ready when you need it. But think about it, okay? Divorce isn't easy at our age. Neither is living a lie, I said. That afternoon, I opened a new bank account at a different bank and transferred half our savings into it. Not a penny more. I wasn't looking to punish Linda financially. I just needed to protect myself. I also made a list of everything in the house that was truly mine. Tools, my dad's old records, the few family heirlooms from my side. Everything else she could keep. Wednesday night, I found Linda sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by brochures for beachfront rentals. What's all this? I asked, though I already knew. Our 31st anniversary was next month, and we'd talked about renting a place on the Gulf Coast. Just looking at options for our trip, she smiled up at me. This one has a hot tub on the deck. What do you think? I studied her face as she described the property. Was she really planning our anniversary getaway while sleeping with Jake? Or was this just another cover, another lie to maintain appearances? Sounds perfect, I managed to say. Go ahead and book it if you want." She beamed at me, and for just a moment I saw echoes of the young woman I'd married, eager, warm, genuine. But then her phone buzzed and something flickered in her eyes. That tiny betrayal was all it took to remind me of reality. "I'm heading to bed early," I said. "Got a busy day tomorrow." "Everything okay at the shop?" she asked, already reaching for her phone. "Just some supplier issues. Nothing I can't handle." In our bedroom, I packed a small overnight bag and hid it in the trunk of my car while Linda was in the shower. Then I wrote a letter, 3 pages of everything I needed to say. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, but also the goodbye. I sealed it in an envelope and tucked it into my jacket pocket for tomorrow. Thursday morning arrived bright and clear. Linda kissed me goodbye as I left for work, the same as she had thousands of times before. "Don't forget I'm meeting Susan for dinner tonight," she lied smoothly. Susan was her alibi, her unwitting accomplice. I wondered if she'd even bothered to coordinate with her friend, or if she'd simply grown so confident in my obliviousness that it didn't matter. "Have fun," I told her. "Don't rush home on my account." At the shop, I couldn't focus on anything. Frank noticed, of course. After 30 years in business together, he could read me like a manual. "You look like hell," he said bluntly. "What's going on?" I considered lying, keeping it all bottled up. But Frank deserved better, and honestly, I needed to say it out loud to someone who would understand. "Linda's been cheating on me with Jake Carson." Frank's face went from shock to disbelief to anger in seconds. "Jesus, Tom, are you sure?" "Saw it with my own eyes." He let out a long breath. "What are you going to do?" "End it, tonight." "You need backup?" "I can come with you." I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone." Frank clasped my shoulder. "Whatever you need, you got it. Stay at my place if you want. Spare room's always ready." "Thanks," I said, grateful for the offer, but hoping I wouldn't need it. I'd already booked a room at the Comfort Inn off the highway, a clean, anonymous place to begin again. As the clock ticked toward closing time, I felt a strange calm settle over me. In just a few hours, this chapter of my life would be finished. Whatever came next would be entirely new territory, frightening maybe, but real. No more lies, no more pretending, just the truth, finally out in the open. At 5:30, I locked up the shop and told Frank I'd see him tomorrow. He knew better than to believe me. We both understood that nothing would be the same after tonight, but he just nodded and told me to call if I needed anything. That's the kind of friendship that comes from decades of working side by side. No drama, just quiet support when it matters. I drove across town to Carson's, taking my time, carefully checking my mirrors at each stoplight. Part of me wondered if I might catch Linda driving the same route, but I didn't see her silver Accord anywhere. She was probably already there, in Jake's back office or that private service bay, thinking I was safely occupied at work. When I pulled into Carson's parking lot at 5:55, I spotted her car immediately, parked around the side of the building. The closed sign was flipped on the front door, but lights still burned inside. For a moment, I sat in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, and allowed myself to feel everything: the anger, the betrayal, the deep-cutting pain that came from knowing the person you trusted most had been living a double life. Then I took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope from my jacket pocket, and stepped out into the cool evening air. I didn't bother with the front door. Instead, I walked around to the service entrance, the one I'd seen Linda using. It was unlocked, as I expected. Jake was waiting for me after all. The service area was empty and quiet, the tools all put away for the day. Clean concrete floors, organized workbenches, the lingering smells of oil and rubber. Through the partially open door at the back, I could hear low voices. I pushed the door open without knocking. Jake's office wasn't large, but they'd made themselves comfortable. Linda was perched on the edge of his desk, her back to the door, while Jake sat in his chair. They each held a glass of what looked like whiskey, a small celebration before their weekly rendezvous, perhaps. They both turned at the sound of the door. Jake had the decency to look uncomfortable. Linda's face drained of color. "Tom?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I had an appointment," I said calmly. "Jake and I arranged it." She turned to Jake, confused, hurt, betrayed in her own way. "You knew?" Jake stood up, hands raised slightly like he was approaching a dangerous animal. "Let's all just take a breath here. We can talk about this like adults." "Adults," I repeated. "Is that what you call sneaking around behind my back for 6 months? Acting like adults?" Linda slid off the desk, taking a step toward me. "Tom, I can explain—" "Save it." I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not here for explanations or excuses." "Then why are you here?" Jake asked, his eyes darting between us. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and placed it on his desk. "To deliver this and to say goodbye." Linda stared at the envelope, then at me. "What is that?" "Everything I have to say to you. Read it or don't. That's up to you." "You can't just—" Linda started, her voice rising with panic. "I can," I cut her off. "And I am. I've already spoken to Martin. The divorce papers will be ready next week." "Divorce?" She stumbled back like I'd slapped her. "Tom, please, let's talk about this. It's not what you think." I almost laughed. "It's exactly what I think. I saw you, Linda, right here in this building. I'm not stupid, just trusting. Too trusting, as it turns out." Jake moved forward. "Look, Tom, I understand you're upset." "You don't understand a damn thing," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You work with engines all day, Jake. You should know that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be replaced." A tear slipped down Linda's cheek. 30 years, Tom? 30 years? And you won't even give me a chance to explain?" Something inside me broke at those words. Not my heart. That was already in pieces. But whatever restraint had been holding back my anger. A chance? Like the chance you gave our marriage before you started sleeping with him? Like the chance you had every single day for 6 months to tell me the truth? My voice rose with each question. "You had chances, Linda. You had 30 years of chances, and you threw them all away for this." The office fell silent. Linda was crying openly now. Jake stood awkwardly beside her, unsure whether to comfort her or keep his distance. I took a deep breath, forcing myself back under control. This wasn't how I'd planned it. I wasn't going to leave as the angry, shouting husband. That wasn't who I wanted to be. "I'll have my things out of the house by the weekend," I said, my voice level again. "You can keep everything else." Linda wiped her eyes, suddenly looking older than I'd ever seen her. "Where will you go?" "That's not your concern anymore." I turned to leave, but Jake called after me. "Tom, wait. This isn't all on Linda. I pursued her. I knew she was married to you. If you're going to blame someone—" "I blame both of you," I said without turning around. "But mostly, I blame myself for not seeing it sooner." "Tom, please," Linda's voice broke on my name. "Please don't go like this." I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. For a brief moment I remembered her at 22, smiling at me across the diner counter. I remembered our wedding day, the birth of our children, the thousands of small moments that had made up our life together. Then I remembered her kissing Jake in the service bay, and those memories shattered like glass. "Goodbye, Linda." I walked out without looking back. The Comfort Inn room was exactly what you'd expect: beige walls, generic landscape paintings, a bed that wasn't mine. I sat on the edge of the mattress, shoes still on, staring at my phone as it lit up with Linda's calls and texts. "Please come home. We need to talk. It's not what you think. I still love you." Each message felt like another twist of the knife. I silenced the phone and tossed it onto the nightstand. The room's small refrigerator hummed in the corner. Inside was a 6-pack I'd picked up on the way, but I hadn't opened one yet. Getting drunk wouldn't solve anything. That wasn't how my father had raised me. Face your problems standing up, he always said. You can't fix what you can't see clearly. Dad had been gone 15 years now. I wondered what he would think of all this. He'd liked Linda, welcomed her into the family without hesitation. She's got a good heart, he'd told me before the wedding. Turns out we were both wrong about that. Around midnight, someone knocked on my door. My heart lurched, thinking it might be Linda, but when I peered through the peephole, I saw Frank standing there, a paper bag in his arms. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said when I opened the door. "Figured you might need some company." I stood aside to let him in. "How'd you find me?" "Called every motel in town until I got lucky." He placed the bag on the small table by the window. "Brought sandwiches from Manny's, and this?" He pulled out a bottle of Jameson. "Thought you might need something stronger than beer." I managed a weak smile. Playing detective and bartender now? Just being a friend. Frank pulled out 2 plastic cups from the bag and poured us each a generous measure of whiskey. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his cup. I clinked my cup against his. "To the end of bullshit." The whiskey burned going down, a welcome physical sensation after hours of emotional numbness. "You want to talk about it?" Frank asked after a while. I shook my head. "Not much to say that you don't already know." "Fair enough." He unwrapped one of the sandwiches and handed it to me. "Eat something, at least." We sat in companionable silence, eating sandwiches and sipping whiskey. That's another thing about long-time friendships. You don't always need words. After his second drink, Frank finally spoke up. "You know, my brother went through something similar a few years back. Found out his wife was seeing their neighbor. Tore him up pretty bad." "How's he doing now?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. "Better than ever. Met a lady at his gym. They just got back from a cruise to Alaska." Frank refilled our cups. "Point is, there's life after this, Tom." "Good life." "Maybe for your brother. He's what, 15 years younger than me?" "Age has nothing to do with it. You've always taken care of yourself. You've got your own business. You're not hard on the eyes." He grinned. "Hell, once word gets out you're single, you'll have to beat the ladies off with a stick." I snorted. "Right. Women are lining up for divorced mechanics in their late 50s. "You'd be surprised." Frank's expression turned serious. "Look, I'm not saying it'll be easy, but it's not the end either." "Feels like it," I admitted. 30 years, Frank. I keep asking myself what I missed, what signs I should have seen." Don't do that to yourself. Some people are just good at hiding who they really are. Linda wasn't like that before. At least, I didn't think she was. People change, or maybe they just get better at showing their true colors. Frank shrugged. "Either way, it's not on you." We finished the bottle and Frank called a cab, insisting he was too drunk to drive. Before he left, he gripped my shoulder. "Come to the shop tomorrow. Work will keep your mind busy." After he was gone, I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. 30 years of marriage ended in a 10-minute confrontation. 3 decades of shared history reduced to an envelope of accusations and goodbyes. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and heavy. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the thin curtains. For one disorienting moment, I reached across the bed for Linda, only to find empty space. Reality crashed back in waves. The discovery, the confrontation, the end. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 29 text messages. I deleted them all without reading them. Whatever Linda had to say wouldn't change anything now. Frank was right about one thing. I needed to keep busy, needed to move forward, even if I had no idea where I was going. I showered, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and headed for the only place that still made sense to me. The shop was waiting. The shop had always been my sanctuary. When Jenny was born with complications and spent her first week in the NICU, I'd retreat to the garage at night and rebuild engines until dawn. When my father passed away, I'd worked on his old Mustang for weeks, processing my grief through motor oil and socket wrenches. The familiar routines of diagnostics and repairs had always helped me make sense of a world that sometimes didn't. But today, even the shop felt different. Frank had already opened up when I arrived. He took one look at me and handed me a large coffee. "You look like hell warmed over." "Feel worse," I admitted, taking a grateful sip. "Martinez's Chevy is in Bay 3, transmission issues. Thought you might want to tackle it." I nodded, relieved to have something concrete to focus on. "Thanks." The morning passed in a blur of grease and metal. I worked steadily, letting the familiar routine numb my thoughts. The transmission was a mess, typical for Martinez, who drove like he was perpetually late, but it was the kind of challenge I needed. Complex enough to demand full attention, physical enough to burn through some of the anger still simmering in my chest. Around noon, Frank appeared beside the Chevy. "There's someone here to see you." I slid out from under the car, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "If it's Linda—" "It's not," Frank said quickly. "It's Jake Carson." My jaw tightened. "Tell him to get the hell out of my shop." "Already tried. He says he's not leaving until he talks to you." I swore under my breath. "Fine. Where is he?" "Waiting by your office." Jake stood awkwardly by the door to my small office, looking out of place in his clean clothes. When he saw me approach, engine grease up to my elbows, he straightened up. "You've got some nerve coming here," I said without preamble. "I know, but I needed to talk to you." He glanced around. "In private, maybe?" "Whatever you have to say, you can say right here." Jake sighed. "Fine. I came to apologize, and to let you know I ended things with Linda this morning." That caught me off guard. "You what?" "I ended it. Told her I couldn't do this anymore." I stared at him, trying to read his face. "Why? Getting cold feet now that it's out in the open?" "No," he said quietly. "Because it was wrong. It was wrong from the beginning, and I knew it. I just—" He trailed off, looking more like the young apprentice I once knew than the man who'd been sleeping with my wife. "You just what? Couldn't help yourself?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "I'm not making excuses. What we did, what I did, was unforgivable. I knew you, respected you. You taught me half of what I know about cars." He shook his head. "And this is how I repaid that." "Why are you telling me this? You want forgiveness? Absolution?" "Number, I don't expect either of those things. I just thought you should know that I'm not pursuing her. I'm stepping back completely." I leaned against a workbench, suddenly tired. What she does now is her business, not mine. "She wants you back, Tom. She's devastated." "She's devastated she got caught," I corrected him. "There's a difference." "Maybe," Jake conceded. "But I thought you should know anyway." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Once, years ago, I'd considered Jake almost like a son. I'd taught him how to diagnose tricky electrical problems, how to feel when a timing was off, how to listen to an engine and know exactly what it needed. And somehow, along the way, he'd come to believe he knew what my wife needed too. "Are we done here?" I finally asked. Jake nodded. "Yeah, we're done. For what it's worth, Tom, I really am sorry." "Save it for someone who cares, Jake." He turned to leave, then paused. "She told me why, you know. Why she started coming to my shop in the first place." Despite myself, I felt a twist of curiosity. "Why?" "She said you were always busy, working late, taking care of everyone else's problems. She said she felt invisible." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Was that true? Had I really been so absorbed in the shop, in providing for us, that I'd made Linda feel unseen? "That doesn't justify what you did," I said, my voice rough. "No," Jake agreed. "It doesn't. Nothing could. But I thought you should know anyway." After he left, I stood there a long time, turning a wrench over and over in my hands. Had I played a part in what happened? Was I partly to blame for the collapse of my marriage? I shook my head, forcing the thought away. Whatever issues Linda and I had, she'd chosen deception over honesty. She'd chosen Jake over me, over our vows, over 30 years of history. Whatever happened next, that choice was on her, not me. I went back to Martinez's Chevy and dove under it again, losing myself in the transmission's complexity. Cars, at least, were honest. They didn't lie. They didn't cheat. When something was broken, you fixed it. When something was damaged beyond repair, you replaced it. If only marriages were that straightforward. By the end of the day, my back ached and my hands were raw, but Martinez's car was purring like new. I'd skipped lunch and barely spoken to anyone. Frank gave me worried looks, but knew better than to push. As I was washing up, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Linda. I silenced it and put it back in my pocket. Whatever she had to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. 3 days passed in a blur of work, takeout food, and fitful sleep in my motel room. I avoided the house, ignoring Linda's increasingly desperate messages. On Saturday morning, Frank insisted on coming with me to collect my things. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said, and I was too tired to argue. Linda's car wasn't in the driveway when we pulled up, which was a relief. I'd texted her earlier to let her know I was coming. Part of me had expected her to ignore my request for privacy, but it seemed even Linda had some respect for boundaries, now that it was too late. Standing on the porch, my key hovering at the lock, I felt a strange mix of emotions. This had been my home for 26 years. We'd raised our children here, built memories. Now I was entering as an outsider, a stranger collecting his belongings. "You okay?" Frank asked. I nodded and pushed the door open. The house smelled the same, that familiar blend of Linda's perfume, the lemon cleaner she used on the hardwood floors, and the faint lingering scent of the chili she'd made earlier in the week. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, yet everything was different. "I'll start with the garage," I told Frank. "Most of my stuff is out there anyway." My tools were organized just as I'd left them, socket sets arranged by size, screwdrivers in their racks, specialty instruments in labeled drawers. The familiar order was comforting as I methodically packed them into boxes and containers. Frank worked silently beside me, respecting my need for space while still being present. That's why I'd always trusted him as a business partner. He knew when to step in and when to back off. In the basement, I collected my fishing gear and the old records my father had left me. In the bedroom, I took only clothes and a few personal items, my father's pocket watch, photos of the kids, the baseball signed by the '92 Tigers that Mark had given me for my 50th birthday. Our wedding photo still sat on the dresser. I picked it up, studying our younger faces. Linda in her simple white dress, me in a rented tux that was slightly too big in the shoulders. Both of us smiling like we had forever stretched out before us. I placed the photo back on the dresser. That didn't belong to me anymore. That belonged to the past. As I was zipping up my last duffel bag, I heard the front door open. Frank glanced at me, eyebrows raised in question. I nodded slightly. It was fine. I knew this confrontation was inevitable. Linda appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face pale and drawn. She'd lost weight in just a few days. Her clothes hung loose on her frame. "Tom," she said softly, like my name was something fragile. "I didn't think you'd still be here." "Just finishing up," I replied, hoisting the duffel onto my shoulder. "Frank's helping me load the truck." "Frank." She acknowledged him with a small nod, which he returned stiffly, before excusing himself, muttering something about checking the boxes in the garage. Once he was gone, Linda took a tentative step into the room. "I meant to be out when you came. I thought maybe we could talk." "I got your messages," I said, "all 57 of them." "And you didn't answer a single one." There was a hint of accusation in her voice. "What did you expect, Linda? That I'd rush back and forgive you? That we'd talk it out over coffee and everything would be fine?" "No, but I expected 30 years to count for something. to at least warrant a conversation. I set the duffel back down, suddenly too tired to hold it. Okay, talk. She seemed startled, as if she hadn't expected me to agree. I made a terrible mistake, Tom. The worst mistake of my life. Which part? Sleeping with Jake or lying to me for months? All of it. Her eyes filled with tears. I know you won't believe me, but I never meant for any of this to happen. Things like that don't just happen, Linda. You make choices. Every time you went to his shop, every time you lied about where you were going, every time you slept with him, those were all choices. I know, she whispered, and I'll regret them for the rest of my life. Jake came to see me, I said. He told me you felt invisible. Linda looked away. It wasn't just that. Then what was it? What was so broken in our marriage that you had to look elsewhere? Help me understand, because I've been racking my brain trying to figure it out. We stopped seeing each other, Tom, really seeing each other. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? I wanted to deny it, to tell her she was making excuses. But there was a ring of truth to her words that I couldn't dismiss entirely. And that justifies cheating? No, she said quickly. Nothing justifies what I did. I should have talked to you. I should have told you how I was feeling. She trailed off, wiping at her tears. You just found it easier to start fresh with someone else, I finished for her. Jake ended it, she said quietly. He told me he couldn't do it anymore. I know, he told me. I would have ended it anyway. She took another step toward me. Tom, I still love you. I've always loved you. What I did, it was selfish and stupid and unforgivable. But if there's any chance at all that we could try to fix this— There isn't, I cut her off, retrieving the duffel bag. Some things can't be fixed, Linda. You broke us. Not just me, not just our marriage. Us. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. So that's it? 30 years, just thrown away? You threw it away, I reminded her. I'm just making it official. I moved past her toward the door, stopping only when she grasped my arm. Please, she whispered. Please don't go like this. For a moment, just a moment, I felt my resolve waver. Then I remembered her at Carson's, laughing with Jake, kissing him, and the pain hardened back into determination. Goodbye, Linda. I walked out of the bedroom, out of the house, without looking back. Frank was waiting by the truck, the bed already loaded with boxes. I tossed the duffel in and climbed into the driver's seat. All set? He asked. I nodded, starting the engine. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Linda stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching us go. I kept driving. The divorce papers came through faster than I expected. Martin had made it his personal mission to expedite everything, pulling strings with a judge he'd gone to law school with. 6 weeks after that night at Carson's, I sat across from him in his office, pen hovering over the final documents. Once you sign, Martin said, it'll be official in about 10 business days. The house is hers, as discussed. Your share of its value will be transferred to your account. The shop remains solely in your name. Retirement accounts split down the middle. Clean, straightforward, final. I stared at the signature line, a thin black space waiting for me to end 30 years of marriage. Has she signed already? Martin nodded. Yesterday. She waived her right to alimony, by the way. I didn't tell you before because I wasn't sure she'd follow through, but she did. That surprised me. Linda was entitled to alimony. Pretty substantial alimony, given the length of our marriage and the fact that she'd worked only part-time for most of it, supporting my career. Did she say why? Her lawyer said she didn't want anything she hadn't earned. Martin made air quotes with his fingers. Take that however you want. Guilt, remorse, an attempt at redemption. Whatever her reasons, it didn't change what needed to happen next. I signed my name with a steady hand, drew a line through our 3 decades together, and handed the papers back to Martin. "Congratulations," he said, though his tone suggested it wasn't exactly a happy occasion. "You're almost a free man." I felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, no sense of closure. Just a hollow emptiness where feelings used to be. "Thanks for handling this so quickly," I told him, standing to leave. "You sure you're okay, Tom?" Not everyone takes divorce this calmly. "I'm fine." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was functioning, working, eating, sleeping occasionally, just ready to move on. Martin looked skeptical, but didn't push. "Call me if you need anything, and I mean anything, legal or otherwise." The apartment I'd rented was a 15-minute drive from the shop, a small one-bedroom in a complex that catered to divorced men of a certain age. The woman in the rental office had barely glanced at my paperwork before handing over the keys. "Unit 14B," she'd said, "freshly painted. The welcome basket has shower curtain rings. Men always forget those." She wasn't wrong. The place came furnished, but I'd had to buy almost everything else: towels, dishes, a decent coffee maker. Linda had texted offering to send some things from the house, but I'd declined. Better to start fresh, even if it meant eating off paper plates for a week. The shop kept me busy, at least. Frank and I had picked up a new fleet contract with a local delivery company, which meant steady work and predictable income. I took on more hours than I needed to, staying late into the evenings, arriving before the sun was up. If Frank noticed my extended schedule, he didn't comment on it. Our children had been a different story. I'd finally called both of them a week after moving out, explaining the situation in the most basic terms. "Mom and I are getting divorced." "Yes, it's final." "No, there's no chance of reconciliation." "Yes, I'm okay," Jenny had cried. Mark had sworn. Both had offered to fly home immediately, but I'd talked them out of it. What good would it do? The damage was done. "Mom says she made a mistake," Jenny told me during one of our calls. "She says she'd do anything to fix it." "Some mistakes can't be fixed, honey." "People forgive cheating all the time, Dad. They go to counseling. They work through it." "I'm not people," I'd replied. "And this isn't just about cheating. It's about trust, respect, honesty. Without those things, what's left?" Mark was more directly angry at Linda, at Jake, at the situation. "Want me to come beat the shit out of this Carson guy?" he'd offered, only half joking. "I could make it look like an accident." "I appreciate the thought, son, but that's not the answer. Not worth ruining your life over." "It just seems like he's getting away with it. Both of them are." I'd thought about that often in the weeks since. The question of justice, of consequences. Was Linda truly suffering for what she'd done? Was Jake? Did it matter if they were? The old me would have said no, that living well was the best revenge. But the new me, the post-Linda me, wasn't so sure. The new me still woke up at 3 a.m. with an ache in my chest that no amount of work could dull. The new me still caught myself reaching for the phone to tell her about my day before remembering we didn't do that anymore. The new me still wanted something more than just a clean break. The new me wanted them to feel what I felt. The idea came to me on a Tuesday morning, 2 months after I'd signed the divorce papers. I was underneath a Ford F-150, replacing a leaking oil pan, when I overheard a conversation between our front desk manager and a customer. "Carson's Auto?" "Oh, I wouldn't go there," Debbie was saying. "Their work's shoddy and they overcharge. Trust me, you're better off having Tom and Frank look at it." I slid out from under the truck, wiping my hands on a shop towel. The customer, a middle-aged woman with a worried expression, glanced between Debbie and me. "Is that true?" she asked. "About Carson's?" "My friend recommended them, but if you think they're not good—" "Debbie's just loyal to our shop," I said automatically. "Carson's does fine work." The words tasted bitter, but professional courtesy was a hard habit to break. After the customer left, Debbie gave me a confused look. "I thought you'd want me steering customers away from them, especially after what happened with Linda." Word's gotten around, huh? She had the grace to look embarrassed. Small town, people talk. For what it's worth, everyone thinks she's an idiot for what she did. That shouldn't have made me feel better, but it did. Just a little. Later that afternoon, I looked up Carson's Auto Service online. Their website was slick. Professional photos, customer testimonials, a list of services with transparent pricing. Business was clearly good. There was even a photo of Jake on the About Us page, looking confident and successful in a crisp blue shirt with the Carson's logo. Something sour twisted in my stomach. Jake had wrecked my marriage, and here he was, thriving. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. That's when the idea took shape. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about evening the score, about consequences. "You're buying a truck?" Frank asked the next day, when I mentioned I was looking at a used Dodge Ram that had caught my eye. "Thinking about it," I replied. "Been wanting one for a while." "What about the Mustang?" "Keeping it. But I could use something more practical, something with a bed for hauling." Frank nodded, accepting this without question. We'd been friends long enough that he knew when to probe and when to let things lie. The Ram was in decent shape. 8 years old, some cosmetic wear, but mechanically sound. I paid for it in cash, enjoying the dealer's surprised expression when I pulled out the envelope of hundreds. A divorce has a way of freeing up funds you didn't know you had. Phase 1 of the plan. Phase 2 began a week later when I pulled the Ram into Carson's Auto Service, right as they opened. The overnight rain had left the parking lot slick with shallow puddles that reflected the gray morning sky. The bell jingled as I entered, and a familiar face looked up from behind the counter. Kyle, the same teenager who'd been working the day I confronted Jake. He didn't seem to recognize me. "Help you?" he asked, barely looking up from his phone. "Need an oil change and tire rotation for the Dodge outside." Kyle nodded, typing something into the computer. "Name?" "James Wilson." The fake name slid easily off my tongue. "Phone number?" I gave him a burner phone number I'd set up the previous day. "Any other issues with the vehicle?" "Just routine maintenance. Been making some funny noises lately, but nothing serious." Kyle printed off a form for me to sign. "We'll check the fluids, do a basic inspection along with the oil change. That okay?" "Perfect." I signed the fake name with a practiced hand. "How long do you think it'll take?" "Couple hours. We're pretty backed up today." "That's fine. I'll come back later." I dropped the keys on the counter. "Jake working today?" Kyle nodded. "Yeah, he's in the back. Tell him James says hi. We used to work together at Hartman's." The lie came easily, too easily maybe, but I was committed now. Outside, I called an Uber to take me back to my apartment. As I waited, I found myself glancing at the service bay doors, half expecting to see Jake emerge. What would I say if he did? Would he recognize my truck? Would he suspect anything? But the bay doors remained closed, and 15 minutes later, I was in the back of a stranger's Toyota heading home. Phase 2. In progress. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. I cleaned my apartment, answered some emails, checked in with Frank about a part we were waiting for. All the while, a thread of nervous anticipation hummed beneath my skin. Was I really going through with this? Was it worth the risk? At 4:30, I called Carson's. Kyle answered. "This is James Wilson, checking on my Dodge?" "Oh yeah, all done. We close at 5:30 if you want to pick it up today." "Great, I'll be there soon." I took another Uber back to Carson's, timing it so I'd arrive around 5:15. As the Uber pulled away, I studied the building with new eyes. The large windows where customers could watch their cars being serviced. The side exit where I'd seen Linda's car parked that day. The back service bay where they'd kissed. Everything looked so normal, so innocent. No one passing by would ever guess what had happened here, how lives had been changed, promises broken, trust shattered. Inside, Kyle was counting out the cash drawer, preparing to close for the day. He glanced up as I entered. "Mr. Wilson, Your truck's all set. Just need you to settle up." "Actually," I said, "I'd like to speak with Jake first. Had some questions about the service?" Kyle looked annoyed but picked up the shop phone. "Boss? Customer wants to talk to you about a Dodge Ram." He listened for a moment, then hung up. "He'll be right out." I waited by the counter, heart pounding uncomfortably against my ribs. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for. I wasn't entirely sure what would happen next, but I knew it would change everything. Again. Jake pushed through the door from the service area, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. He looked up, saw me, and froze. "Tom," he said, his voice barely audible, "what are you doing here?" I smiled thinly. "Just came to check on my truck." Jake looked from me to Kyle, then back again. "Kyle, take your break. I got this." The teenager didn't need to be told twice. He disappeared into the back, leaving us alone in the front of the shop. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Jake's face. "James Wilson?" Jake asked, gesturing to the paperwork on the counter. "Thought it would be easier that way." He nodded slowly. "Your truck's ready. Oil's changed, tires rotated, everything checked out. No charge." "I'm not here for free service, Jake." "Then what are you here for?" His voice was wary, resigned, like a man awaiting a sentence he knew was coming. I pulled a manila envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the counter between us. "I'm here to give you this." Jake stared at the envelope, not touching it. "What is it?" "Open it." He hesitated, then picked it up and broke the seal. Inside were copies of documents from the county zoning board, tax records, and several photos. I watched his face as understanding dawned. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice strangely calm. "Public records, mostly. The photos I took myself last week." I gestured to one showing the back of his shop. "Your extended service bay, the one you added last year. It's 8 feet over the property line." "That's impossible. I had surveys done before construction." "Incorrect surveys, apparently." I tapped the zoning document. "According to this, you're encroaching on city land. Been operating an illegal addition for nearly a year." Jake's face had gone pale. "What do you want, Tom?" "Nothing complicated." I met his gaze steadily. "I want you to sell the shop and leave town." A startled laugh escaped him. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" "You want me to sell my business and move away because of what happened with Linda? That's insane." "I don't care what you think it is. I'm telling you what's going to happen." I kept my voice level, reasonable. "You sell Carson's, you leave Riverdale, you never contact Linda again." "And if I don't?" I slid another document across the counter. "Then these findings go to the city inspector tomorrow morning. He's an old friend, by the way. Brings his Cadillac to our shop every spring." "You'd destroy my business over this?" Jake's voice rose slightly. "Over a woman who chose to be with me?" Something hot and dangerous flared in my chest. "This isn't about Linda choosing you. This is about both of you lying to me for months. This is about you knowing exactly who I was, who she was, and doing it anyway. I told you I was sorry. I ended things with her. What more do you want from me?" "I already told you what I want. Sell the shop, leave town, simple." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "This is my life, Tom. Everything I've worked for is in this business. I remember feeling that way about my marriage." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across the counter. Finally, he looked up, a new hardness in his eyes. "You know, I've always wondered why Linda came to my shop that first day. Know what she told me?" I said nothing, waiting. "She said she'd driven past 100 times, wondering about the man who'd trained her husband, the man Tom Brennan always spoke so highly of. She was curious about me because of you." The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to make you understand that this whole thing is more complicated than you think. Linda wasn't just looking for someone to screw around with. She was looking for someone who would see her, listen to her, make her feel valued. And that was you? The noble other man, giving her what her husband couldn't. Jake's jaw tightened. I'm not defending what we did, but we're not monsters, Tom. We're people who made terrible mistakes. Mistakes have consequences, I said, tapping the manila envelope. These are yours. His shoulders slumped slightly. How long do I have? 60 days should be enough to find a buyer. And if I go to the zoning board myself, try to fix this legally? I shrugged. You can try. But violations like this usually result in hefty fines, sometimes criminal charges for operating without proper permits. Worst case? They make you tear down the addition and cease operations until it's fixed. How long could your business survive being shut down? Jake was silent, defeat written across his features. In that moment I felt a rush of satisfaction so intense it was almost dizzying. This was justice. This was consequence. This was evening the score. Your keys are on the hook by the door, Jake finally said, gathering up the documents and sliding them back into the envelope. Trucks parked out front. I retrieved my keys, then turned back to him. 60 days, Jake. Not a day more. As I walked toward the door, he called after me. Did it help? I paused, hand on the doorknob. Did what help? This. He gestured around vaguely. The threats, the revenge. Does it make you feel better about what happened? I considered the question seriously. Did it make me feel better? The answer surprised me. No, I admitted. Nothing makes it better. But this isn't about feeling better. It's about living with what comes next. Outside, the evening air was cool against my face. My new truck waited at the curb, freshly serviced by the man who'd helped destroy my marriage. I climbed in and started the engine, registering distantly that it sounded smoother than before. As I pulled away from Carson's auto service, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Jake stood in the doorway, envelope in hand, watching me go. For the first time in months, I drove without looking back. 6 weeks after my confrontation with Jake, a for sale sign appeared in front of Carson's auto service. I drove past it on my way to work, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The victory I'd expected to feel was muted, overshadowed by the persistent hollow ache that had become my constant companion. Frank noticed the sign too. Heard Carson shutting down, he commented casually, as we worked on an engine rebuild. Word is Jake got an offer from a shop over in Millfield. That's so? I kept my voice neutral, focused on the carburetor in my hands. Yeah, shame for his customers. Not many decent mechanics around here. I grunted non-committally. Frank shot me a sideways glance but didn't push. That was Frank, always giving me space even when he suspected there was more to the story. Late that afternoon, Martin called to tell me the divorce was officially final. Just came through today, he said. You're a free man, Tom. Thanks for letting me know, I replied, unsure what else to say. Should I celebrate? Mourn? Both seemed equally inappropriate. You doing okay? Martin asked. Not too many guys take divorce this calmly. I'm fine. The lie came automatically now, just focused on work. Well, if you need anything, legal or otherwise, you know where to find me. After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the wall. Divorced, single, alone, words that hadn't applied to me in over 3 decades. Strange how such a profound life change could be reduced to a few pieces of paper, a judge's signature, a brief phone call. I worked late that evening, long after Frank and the others had gone home. The familiar routines of diagnostics and repairs had become my sanctuary, my therapy. Cars made sense. They followed rules, patterns, logic. Unlike people, unlike marriage. Around 9, as I was locking up, my phone rang. Linda's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. What was left to say? But some habits die hard, and 30 years of answering her calls wasn't easy to break. "Hello?" "Tom." Her voice was soft, tentative. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I was just closing the shop. "Of course, always the last one there." There was a smile in her voice, tinged with sadness. I just wanted to let you know I got the papers today. From Martin." "Yeah, me too." A pause stretched between us, filled with 3 decades of shared history and the weight of all that had been lost. "I also heard about Carson's," she continued, "about Jake selling the business." I tensed, my hand tightening on the phone. "What about it?" "He came to see me yesterday, told me he's moving to Millfield." Another pause. "He also told me why." I said nothing, waiting. "Did you really threaten him with zoning violations?" "Not a threat if it's true." Linda sighed. "I know what we did was wrong, Tom. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. But this, forcing him out of business, out of town, that's not like you." "Maybe you don't know me as well as you thought." "I know you better than anyone," she replied gently. "Or at least I did. And the Tom Brennan I knew wouldn't resort to revenge. He was better than that." Her words stirred something uncomfortable in my chest. People change. "Yes, they do." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I just hope you're not changing into someone you'll eventually regret being." The truth of her words hit harder than I expected. Who was I becoming? The man who'd threatened Jake, who'd plotted revenge in cold calculation. Was that really who I wanted to be? "I need to finish closing up," I said, avoiding the question. "Of course, I wanted to say I'm sorry, again, for everything." "I know you are." "And I wanted to tell you that I'm moving too. Jenny's offered me her guest house in Colorado for a while. I think some distance would be good for both of us." Colorado, halfway across the country. The news should have brought relief, but instead, I felt an unexpected pang of, what? Loss? Regret? "When do you leave?" I asked. "Next week. The house is already on the market. I use that realtor you liked, Michael Davies. He's good. Fair." Another silence, heavier this time. "I guess this is really goodbye then," Linda said finally. "I guess it is." "Tom?" "Yeah?" "I hope you find happiness again. You deserve it." The lump in my throat made it hard to respond. "You too, Linda." After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the dark shop windows. 30 years of marriage ended with a phone call and well wishes. Linda moving to Colorado, Jake relocating to Millfield, everyone scattering like leaves in the wind, leaving me alone with my hollow victory. Was this what I'd wanted? To drive them both away, to salt the earth where my marriage had once grown? 2 months later, I stood in the parking lot of what had once been Carson's Auto Service, now transformed into a tire and muffler franchise. The sign was different, the paint fresher, but it was the same building where I'd watched my life unravel. Across town, Linda's house had sold quickly, above asking price. She'd sent me an email about it, copying my new address on the check for my half of the proceeds. The email was brief, businesslike. She was settling into Jenny's guest house. The Colorado air was doing her good. She'd found part-time work at a local community college. I never replied. What was there to say? The shop was thriving. Frank and I had landed another fleet contract, and we'd hired 2 new mechanics to keep up with demand. I'd moved from my sad divorcee apartment to a small house with a 2-car garage where I could work on my Mustang in peace. On paper, my life was getting back on track. But something was still missing. The hollow feeling hadn't gone away. If anything, it had expanded, consuming more of me with each passing day. My revenge against Jake had brought no satisfaction. Linda's departure had brought no peace. I was just existing, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. It was Frank who finally called me out on it. "You need a vacation," he told me one Friday afternoon. Take the Mustang on that road trip you've been talking about for years. Go see the kids. Do something besides work and sleep." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Bullshit. You're a walking ghost, Tom. Have been since the divorce. It's time to start living again." His bluntness surprised me. "I am living." "No, you're existing. There's a difference." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Look, what happened with Linda was terrible, but it's been months. You can't let it define the rest of your life." "It's not that simple." "Never said it was simple, but it is necessary." His expression softened. "Remember what you told me when Sarah left? You said I had to find a way to be happy again, or she wins twice. Once when she left, and again, every day, I let her absence ruin my life." I remembered. Frank's divorce had been brutal, his wife leaving him for his brother, of all people. He'd been devastated, angry, lost, just like me. But he'd found his way back eventually, started dating again, found joy in simple things. "That was different," I said weakly. "Not so different." Frank checked his watch. "I'm meeting some friends for drinks at O'Malley's. Come along. Just for an hour. Meet some new people." My first instinct was to refuse, to retreat to my empty house with its pristine garage. But something about Frank's words had struck home. Was I really going to let Linda and Jake's betrayal define the rest of my days? Was that the legacy I wanted for myself? "One drink," I conceded. "That's it." Frank grinned. "That's all I'm asking." O'Malley's was busy for a Friday, filled with the after-work crowd, unwinding before the weekend. Frank's friends were nice enough. A couple from his neighborhood, a woman from his bowling league, a guy who owned the hardware store downtown. Normal people with normal lives, sharing drinks and stories and laughter. I nursed a beer and listened more than I talked, feeling strangely out of practice at basic social interaction. When had I become so isolated? Had it been since the divorce, or had it started even before? Had I been withdrawing into work and routine long before Linda sought attention elsewhere? The thought was uncomfortable, too close to what she'd said about feeling invisible. Around 8, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I quite literally bumped into a woman heading in the opposite direction. "Sorry," I mumbled, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "Wasn't watching where I was going." "No harm done." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She was about my age, maybe a few years younger, with short silver hair and laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. "Pretty crowded in here tonight." "Yeah, it is." A pause, awkward but not unpleasant. "I'm Tom, by the way." "Ellen." She extended her hand, which I shook. "Are you here with the crowd from Riverside Construction?" "No, just some friends," as I gestured vaguely toward Frank's table. "You?" "Work event. I teach at the community college. End of semester gathering." "What do you teach?" "Literature, specifically American poetry of the 20th century." "That's specific." She laughed, a warm, throaty sound. "It's niche, I know, but I love it." She glanced back at her table, where her colleagues were signaling for her. "I should get back. It was nice meeting you, Tom." "You too, Ellen." As she walked away, I felt something stir in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Interest, curiosity. A desire to know more about this stranger with the silver hair and the laugh that seemed to come from somewhere genuine. Back at our table, Frank raised an eyebrow at me. "Making new friends?" "Just bumped into her on the way back from the bathroom," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "She seemed nice. She teaches poetry at the community college." Frank's other eyebrow joined the first. "And you know this because—" "We talked for a minute, that's all." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Talking is good." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope, small and fragile, but definitely there. Not because of Ellen specifically, though she seemed lovely, but because for a brief moment I'd been fully present in the world again, I'd had a conversation that wasn't about work or divorce or betrayal. I'd existed outside the narrow boundaries of pain I'd drawn around myself. It wasn't much, just a small crack in the wall I'd built. But it was something. As I drove home later that night, windows down, the Mustang's engine rumbling beneath me, I thought about Frank's words, about Linda's absence, about Jake's departure, about the space they'd left behind, not just in my life, but in my town, in my routine. Space that could be filled with something new if I was brave enough to try. I couldn't forget what had happened, couldn't simply erase 30 years of marriage or the pain of betrayal. But maybe I could learn to carry it differently. Maybe I could find a way to make it part of my story without letting it be the whole story. The road ahead stretched out, dark and unknown. For the first time in months, I found myself curious about where it might lead.